You can keep your title as vice president, Stephen, but my daughter, Jessica, is taking over as chief financial officer starting today. To make this work for the corporate budget, we need you to take a 15% pay cut. Those were the exact words from my boss and supposed friend, Henry Croft, at 8:45 on a rainy Monday morning. I stood at the head of the mahogany table at Crestmont Enterprises, entirely paralyzed. For 13 long years, I had poured my absolute soul into this corporate logistics firm, single-handedly scaling it from a struggling warehouse into a $120 million global empire. I walked into this meeting fully expecting my long-promised promotion to full CFO. Instead, I was staring at Henry's 23-year-old daughter, Jessica, a recent graduate with absolute zero corporate finance experience. Jessica was scrolling on her phone, casually twirling a lock of hair around her finger. She looked up, gave me a sickeningly sugary smile, and said, "Thanks for understanding, Stephen. I am going to need your office space cleared out by mid-morning. It has the best natural light, and honestly, your standard business attire just does not fit the modern elite aesthetic we want for the C-suite. You can use the cubicle down by transit while you train me." The room went dead silent. The other executives looked down at their legal pads, far too cowardly to lock eyes with me. If you are watching this right now, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because I am about to show you exactly how a toxic corporate structure completely destroys itself when it underestimates the most competent person in the room. What Henry and his arrogant daughter did not realize was that they had just triggered a catastrophic chain reaction that would obliterate everything they owned. My name is Stephen Vance. I am 58 years old, and as the VP of Finance and acting CFO, I was the literal engine holding Crestmont Enterprises together. In that precise moment, a cold wave of absolute clarity washed over my entire body. The burning anger inside my chest instantly froze into pure, unadulterated strategy. I did not scream, I did not cry, I did not beg for my job back or remind them of my sacrifices. "I see," I said, my voice completely calm and level under immense pressure. Henry nodded, looking incredibly relieved that his loyal workhorse was not causing a scene in front of the junior partners. "Good," he said smoothly. "Jessica has a massive corporate signing bonus, so adjusting your salary helps us balance the executive allocation cleanly. We knew we could count on your unwavering loyalty, Stephen." That was his very first mistake. He mistook my professional silence for weak compliance. I looked up at the sleek digital clock mounted on the boardroom wall. It was exactly 8:55 a.m. I neatly capped my fountain pen, slid it into my breast pocket, and closed my leather portfolio with a soft, definitive click. I stood up, deliberately smoothing down my blazer, feeling the weight of the moment. "I will not be needing the cubicle, Jessica," I said quietly, looking directly at the young girl who thought she could inherit a massive global empire over a morning cup of coffee. I then turned my gaze to Henry, the man I had treated like a brother and mentor for over a decade. "And I will not be adjusting my budget for your signing bonus, Henry." I turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. Henry frowned, clearing his throat loudly. "Stephen, where are you going? The meeting is not adjourned. We need to go over the international ledger before 9:30. I did not answer him. I stepped out into the hallway, walked straight past my corner office without even stopping for my personal things, and entered the elevator. As the metallic doors slid shut, the digital clock in the hallway clicked over to exactly 9 a.m. I reached into my bag, pulled out my corporate phone, and powered it off completely. I whispered to myself in the empty elevator that Henry had absolutely no idea that by forcing me out, he had just signed his own company's death warrant to understand why my walkout at exactly 9 a.m. was an absolute death blow to Crestmont Enterprises. You have to understand the sheer volume of blood, sweat, and tears I poured into that company over the last 13 years. I was not just an executive who stepped into a comfortable, pre-built corporate machine. When I first walked through the doors of Crestmont at age 45, it was not a $120 million empire. It was a chaotic, bleeding, struggling four-man operational warehouse operating out of a cramped industrial park with broken heating and leaking ceilings. The business was facing imminent bankruptcy within 3 months, its bank accounts overdrawn by $50,000, and its suppliers constantly threatening to seize its minimal inventory. Back then, he broke down in front of me during my interview, admitting he did not know how he was going to make payroll the following week. I took a massive professional gamble. I declined lucrative offers from established financial institutions and chose to stay and build. I worked grueling 90-hour weeks, practically living on a cheap cot I set up in the back office near the servers. I single-handedly built their entire accounting infrastructure from scratch, moving them off messy handwritten paper ledgers and onto a highly secure automated tracking system. I managed every single dollar of volatile cash flow that kept the lights on during those dark early years. But that professional dedication demanded a devastatingly high personal price. I gave up my late 40s and early 50s to build Henry's dream. I missed my only daughter's college graduation because an international shipping crisis ran over schedule on a Saturday night. I skipped countless birthdays, holidays, and family milestones, always telling myself it would be worth it in the end. Ultimately, my intense focus on the company led to a painful, quiet divorce. My wife told me she felt like she was married to a ghost who only came home to sleep and check emails. I sacrificed my own happiness because I prioritized Henry's constant, late-night corporate emergencies over everything else in my life. I even used my own personal credit cards to float the company's first major payroll 13 years ago when a client check bounced, risking my entire financial future for a company that was not even mine. To understand why I walked out without a single trace of guilt, you have to look at the absolute disrespect that unfolded during the 48 hours leading up to that boardroom betrayal. The breaking point did not actually start on Monday morning. It began over the weekend when my automated forensic auditing software flagged an alarming series of massive anomalous corporate expenditures. A company credit card newly assigned to Jessica Croft had been aggressively swiped across Europe for tens of thousands of dollars. The ledgers showed five-star luxury hotels in Paris, high-end designer shopping sprees on the Champs-Élysées, and multiple first-class flights, all crudely miscategorized in our system as essential international market research. This was a textbook case of dissipation of corporate assets, a severe breach of fiduciary duty. But it got worse. When I pulled the physical expense vouchers, I realized Jessica had literally forged my signature on the approval forms. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forgery of financial documents is a serious crime. On Sunday afternoon, driven by my deep-seated loyalty to the firm, I called Henry into a private meeting at the office to present the evidence of this blatant financial malfeasance. I expected him to be shocked, or at least grateful that his VP of Finance had caught the breach before an external tax audit occurred. Instead, the moment I laid the financial printouts on his desk, Henry's face turned a deep, defensive crimson. He slammed his hand on the mahogany wood, completely dismissing my detailed reports. "How dare you track my daughter's developmental spending, Stephen?" he snapped, his voice dripping with sudden hostility. "Jessica is the future of this company. If she needs to understand the luxury consumer landscape to expand our logistics footprint, her expenses are completely justified. Frankly, this petty jealousy proves exactly what I have been thinking lately. You have hit your professional ceiling here. You are a great bean counter, but you completely lack the modern, elite aesthetic and global vision required to represent Crestmont on a truly international stage." I sat there, utterly stunned, as the man I had saved from personal bankruptcy gaslit me about my own worth. But he was not finished. He reached into his drawer and slid a revised, 3-page employment contract across the desk toward me. It was a formal demotion, wrapped in corporate jargon. The new terms stripped away my annual performance bonuses, completely revoked my administrative access to our core bank accounts, and explicitly demanded that I hand over all master passwords and system access codes to Jessica by Monday morning. I looked at the man who had promised me 15% equity for 13 years of sacrifice, and realized every single word he had ever told me was a lie. That was the exact moment my internal psychological switch flipped. The misplaced loyalty that had chained me to this toxic company for over a decade completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculative detachment. I did not argue. I did not defend my track record or remind him of the 72 hours I spent saving his home from foreclosure. I simply took the contract, told him I would review it, and walked out of his office. I spent the rest of Sunday evening quietly ensuring that my proprietary systems were completely secure, leaving every corporate file exactly as it legally should be, without a single bite of illegal sabotage. I did not need to destroy the company. I just needed to let its new leadership manage it. The final drop of degradation occurred the next morning, just minutes before the fateful boardroom meeting. I was at my desk when Jessica casually strolled into my office, holding an iced latte in one hand and a massive crushed cardboard box in the other. Without asking, she dumped the physical box directly onto my lap, spilling hundreds of unorganized, crumpled, and coffee-stained personal receipts all over my desk. "Here, Stephen," Jessica said with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "My dad said you are going to be assisting me now. Go through these and reconcile them into the system before lunch. Make sure they are all approved under corporate travel and try to be quick about it. I want my new office fully cleared out by noon." I looked down at the stained receipts on my lap, then up at her arrogant, smirking face. Any lingering trace of hesitation or regret I might have harbored vanished instantly. This absolute degradation erased my remaining guilt, making me realize that fighting for recognition in this toxic environment was entirely worthless. I quietly stacked the receipts back into the box, remembering the exact technical wording of the bank's security protocols as I prepared my final, silent counter strategy for the boardroom. Back in the boardroom, as Jessica smirked, and Henry leaned back in his leather chair, waiting for me to break, I did something they never expected. I did not yell. I did not slam my hands on the table. Instead, I let out a soft, slow breath, lifted the cardboard box full of coffee-stained personal receipts, and placed it right back on the center of the mahogany table, directly in front of Jessica. "Good luck with the transition," I said, my voice completely level, carrying a polite, unnerving smile that made Henry's grin falter. It was exactly 8:50 a.m. I turned on my heel and quietly exited the boardroom, leaving a heavy, confused silence behind me. I had exactly 10 minutes before my hard deadline to leave the building at 9, and I intended to use every single second with mathematical precision. What they did not know was that I had spent the previous evening preparing for this exact scenario. I walked into my office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. I did not delete corporate files, and I did not destroy data. That would be illegal sabotage, and I am far too smart to give them legal leverage over me. Instead, I executed a series of flawless, entirely legal protective maneuvers. First, I systematically signed out of every single personal banking portal and encrypted corporate network. I initiated a secure wipe of my personal professional data, my browser histories, and my saved credentials, ensuring that my 13 years of specialized financial shortcuts vanished from that machine forever. I formally revoked the license for my patented dynamic tax routing algorithm under 35 U.S.C. Section 271, legally restricting them from using my intellectual property. Next came the critical operational move. I walked over to the small network utility rack mounted inside my office closet. Connected to the primary bridge was my proprietary biometric hardware security token, a small black USB device hardwired to my specific encryption keys. This device was the sole mechanical bridge that allowed the company's automated financial systems to broadcast our daily compliance data stream to our primary lending bank. Without it, the bank's automated risk management platform would receive nothing but static. I meticulously detached the hardware token from the server port, dropped it into my pocket, and zipped it shut. I was legally within my rights. The token was issued under my personal compliance license, not the company's. With 3 minutes left on the clock, I opened my email and drafted a concise, devastatingly clear, one-sentence resignation letter. I did not write an essay detailing my grievances. I did not complain about Jessica or mention the pay cut. I simply wrote, "Please accept this email as formal notification that I am resigning from my position as Vice President of Finance effective immediately at 9 a.m. due to a material breach of verbal contract by executive leadership." I added the head of Human Resources, Henry, and every single member of the board of directors to the recipient line. My finger hovered over the trackpad for a fraction of a second. I hit send. Before shutting down my laptop for the final time, I picked up my personal cell phone. I dialed a number I had kept memorized for 4 years. the direct line to the managing partner of Apex Horizon Partners, Crestmont's largest and most aggressive industry rival. The firm had spent the last 48 months trying to recruit me, offering me massive compensation packages that I had repeatedly turned down out of misplaced loyalty to Henry. The managing partner answered on the second ring. "Stephen, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I am calling to let you know that as of right now, I am officially a free agent," I said, my voice sharp and confident, "and I am ready to talk." "Name the time and place," he replied, his excitement palpable through the line. "Make it 2 o'clock this afternoon at your corporate headquarters," I said, "and make sure your legal and acquisition teams are in the room. I am bringing a $80 million opportunity with me." I hung up, slipped my personal phone into my pocket, grabbed my coat, and walked out of my office. I did not look back at the rows of cubicles. I stepped into the elevator just as the digital display clicked over to exactly 9:19 a.m. But as the heavy steel doors began to slide shut, locking me away from the toxic environment I had survived for 13 years, my phone began to vibrate aggressively in my hand. The caller ID flashed with Henry's office extension. That was when the corporate panic officially began, and I had no intention of looking back. By Tuesday morning, less than 24 hours after I walked out the front doors, the delicate financial house of cards that was Crestmont Enterprises completely collapsed. Back at my house, I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and opened my personal tablet, monitoring the public supply chain indexing servers. I knew exactly what was happening inside their headquarters. The moment the clock had struck midnight, the primary lending bank's automated risk algorithms attempted to ping my proprietary biometric encryption token to validate the daily compliance data stream. For the first time in 13 years, the server met absolute silence. Because my unique biometric signature was missing, the bank's security protocol triggered automatically. By 6 a.m., the bank officially flagged Crestmont Enterprises with an emergency technical default status, instantly freezing their entire $50 million rolling credit line. Inside the office, Jessica Croft was completely oblivious to the impending disaster. She strolled into the executive suite at 9:30 a.m., carrying a designer bag and acting like she owned the world. Her first task as the newly appointed chief financial officer was to authorize a routine $8 million wire transfer to clear payments for our international fuel suppliers and port authorities. But when she booted up the terminal and attempted to execute the transfer, the system rejected her credentials. She tried again, typing faster, her face flushing with frustration as a flashing red notification filled the screen. Access denied, line of credit frozen, compliance validation missing. She was completely locked out of the primary operational banking interface. Within hours, the real-world consequences of her incompetence rippled across the globe. Because the fuel payments failed to clear by the morning deadline, furious international fuel suppliers immediately issued a complete freeze on all transit operations. In major ports from Rotterdam to Singapore, massive cargo ships carrying millions of dollars in freight were suddenly halted at the docks, forbidden from unloading. Crestmont's global logistics network came to an abrupt grinding standstill. The multi-million-dollar supply chain that I spent over a decade perfecting became instantly paralyzed, leaving dozens of premium international clients completely stranded without their vital inventory. But that was only the beginning of their nightmare. The automated bank alert did not just freeze the money. It automatically triggered an institutional notification to our top investors and clients. By 11 a.m., the directors of our top 3 international sovereign wealth fund accounts received a critical automated red flag alert directly on their encrypted corporate screens, informing them that the designated key personnel officer had officially separated from the firm. Remember, these 3 accounts represented over 70% of Crestmont's total annual revenue. The moment those foreign fund managers realized I was no longer personally auditing and safeguarding their capital allocations, they did not hesitate. They immediately invoked the strict 24-hour exit clauses that I had meticulously embedded into their contracts, rendering their agreements void ab initio. One by one, formal legal notices began pouring into Henry's inbox, completely pulling their capital out of the company and canceling their multi-year agreements. In less than 4 hours, $80 million in projected revenue simply vanished from the company's books. By noon, the corporate headquarters was in a state of absolute, unmitigated panic. The phones in the executive suite were ringing off the hook with furious calls from port authorities, stranded ship captains, and terrified board members demanding answers. Henry Croft, finally realizing that something was catastrophically wrong, slammed open the glass doors of the finance department, screaming at the top of his lungs for an explanation. He expected to see a team of highly efficient corporate accountants fixing a minor system glitch. Instead, he found his daughter Jessica weeping hysterically at her mahogany desk, completely paralyzed by fear. She was surrounded by an overwhelming pile of printed banking errors she could not comprehend, utterly unable to read a basic corporate general ledger or understand how to navigate an international institutional credit freeze. Every single bit of her unearned executive arrogance had completely evaporated into thin air. Henry stood frozen in the center of the room, looking at the flashing red warning screens, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead as he finally realized the catastrophic scale of his mistake. He turned to the remaining junior finance staff, his voice shaking with absolute desperation as he ordered them to pull up my employment file immediately. He began screaming at his team to track down my personal home address and my private cell phone number, suddenly realizing that his entire $120 million empire was actively evaporating by the minute. On Tuesday afternoon, my personal cell phone began vibrating continuously on my kitchen counter. It did not stop for 4 hours. Henry Croft called me exactly 54 times in a single afternoon. When I did not answer, the text messages and voicemails began piling up, providing a fascinating psychological study in sudden, desperate corporate panic. The first few voicemails were aggressive and full of toxic executive bluster. He screamed that I was abandoning my post, violating my explicit fiduciary duties, and that he would have the corporate legal team sue me for every single penny I owned if I did not return to the office immediately to hand over the proprietary banking security codes. He even threatened to report me for elder financial abuse, claiming my actions were harming the older board members' pensions, a desperate and legally baseless threat. But as the hours ticked by and the global shipping ports remained completely paralyzed, his tone shifted dramatically. By 4, the anger was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic desperation. "Stephen, please." His voice cracked in the final voicemail. "The bank will not talk to Jessica. The sovereign wealth funds are threatening to pull out. Please, just tell me how to unfreeze the credit line. We can talk about your salary. Just call me back." I did not call him back. Instead, I silenced my phone and spent the afternoon enjoying a luxurious, long-overdue professional spa day. For the first time in 13 years, I was not monitoring a global supply chain or rushing to fix an artificial corporate emergency. As I lay there, surrounded by the scent of lavender oil and hot stones, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I had given that company my entire late adulthood, my marriage, and my personal peace of mind, and they had tried to strip away my professional dignity for a family legacy. Spending the afternoon in total relaxation while their entire $120 million empire fractured under the weight of their own incompetence was the most satisfying corporate clearance I could have ever imagined. By Wednesday morning, the panic reached the absolute top. I received a formal email from the chairman of the board of directors desperately requesting an emergency Zoom conference at 10 a.m. When I logged into the meeting from my new personal tablet, I was not sitting in a cramped cubicle down by transit. I was sitting comfortably in a beautiful sunlit executive office, holding a fresh cup of coffee. On the screen, the entire board looked completely terrified. Henry sat in the center, looking as though he had aged 15 years. His suit was unpressed, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands shook visibly. Jessica was completely absent, likely still hiding in her office weeping. Henry did not even try to maintain his usual dominant posture. He practically wept on camera. "Stephen, thank God you came," he stammered. "Look, we made a terrible mistake. The boardroom announcement on Monday, it was a massive miscommunication. We value you more than anyone else. The board has authorized a new executive package. We are prepared to offer you the permanent title of Chief Financial Officer, an astronomical base salary of $750,000 a year, and an immediate 20% equity stake in Crestmont Enterprises. We will do whatever it takes. Jessica will step down immediately. She can serve simply as an assistant under your direct supervision. Please, Stephen, we need you to sign the banking compliance papers today. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, looking directly into the camera lens. The entire board held their breath, waiting for my savior complex to kick in, but that loyal version of Stephen Vance was permanently dead. Your offer is 13 years too late, Henry, I said, my voice completely calm, carrying a quiet, devastating weight. I decline, and you should know that I signed an exclusive contract yesterday at 2 p.m. to become the senior managing partner at Apex Horizon Partners. Furthermore, because of your sheer incompetence and your daughter's blatant forgery under California Penal Code, Section 470, the directors of your top 3 sovereign wealth funds have already finalized their contract cancellations with Crestmont. They are currently sitting right outside my new office in Apex's conference room, waiting for me to sign historic new logistical agreements directly with my new firm. Have a wonderful rest of your fiscal quarter, gentlemen. I clicked the red button, ending the Zoom call mid-sentence, leaving the entire Crestmont board staring at a dead black screen as their empire collapsed into absolute dust. The aftermath of that single Zoom call was swift, brutal, and entirely predictable. Unable to recover from the massive freeze on their rolling credit line and the instantaneous loss of 70% of their annual revenue, Crestmont Enterprises began a rapid public death spiral. Without my proprietary algorithms managing their complex international tax exposures, their operational profit margins were completely obliterated by aggressive back taxes, shipping delays, and massive custom penalties. Within less than 3 months, the once mighty firm collapsed under the weight of its own debt and filed for complete Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Because the collapse was so sudden, they failed to provide the mandatory 60 days notice for mass layoffs as required by the Warren Act, 29 U.S.C. Section 2101. This monumental legal failure made Henry Croft and the board personally liable for millions of dollars in back wages and penalties to the terminated employees. The board of directors and furious betrayed investors aggressively ousted Henry from his own company, stripping him of his remaining stock and forcing a predatory pennies on the dollar fire sale to Apex Horizon Partners. Henry lost his entire personal fortune, his luxury estate, and the pristine professional reputation he spent a lifetime building, forced to watch his life's work get dismantled from the sidelines while facing massive civil lawsuits for the Warren Act violations. As for Jessica, her corporate career was permanently ruined before it ever truly began. Because I handed the evidence of her forgery over to the authorities, she faced a lengthy and humiliating criminal investigation. She became a cautionary tale across the entire corporate logistics industry, a laughingstock permanently blacklisted from ever holding an executive financial position again. Her unearned arrogance and criminal behavior had cost her family absolutely everything. Meanwhile, my transition to Apex Horizon Partners was nothing short of legendary. As the newly appointed senior managing partner, I was given absolute operational freedom, a massive compensation package, and the genuine professional respect I had earned through over a decade of hard work. The top 3 international sovereign wealth fund clients transitioned smoothly with me, bringing their entire $80 million capital allocations over to Apex on my very first day. The industry immediately recognized where the true financial brains of Crestmont had been all along, but my victory was not just about personal wealth or a more prestigious title. The moment my new contract was finalized, I used my immense professional leverage to execute a complete rescue operation for the people who truly mattered. I systematically reached out to my entire former junior finance team at Crestmont, the brilliant, hard-working analysts who had been left behind to suffer under Jessica's incompetence. I hired every single one of them at Apex Horizon Partners, rescuing them from the sinking ship and provided them with massive 50% salary increases, comprehensive benefits, excellent working conditions, and the deep professional respect they were always denied under Henry's toxic leadership. Together, we built a new, far more powerful logistics infrastructure that dominated the global market within our very first quarter. The final scene of this long journey takes place on another rainy Monday morning, exactly 1 year after I walked out of that toxic boardroom. I am standing before a massive, floor-to-ceiling glass window in my gorgeous new penthouse office, overlooking the sprawling city skyline, completely at peace. I look down at the heavy morning traffic below, holding a warm cup of organic tea, a serene smile on my face. There are no frantic phone calls, no manipulative text messages, and no emergencies to fix. My time is finally my own, and I am surrounded by an elite team that genuinely values my intellect rather than exploiting my loyalty. I often reflect on the painful but necessary lesson of my walkout at exactly 9 a.m. True professional power never comes from an arbitrary corporate title granted by an ungrateful boss, nor does it come from sacrificing your personal life to line the pockets of a manipulative mentor. True power comes from the unshakable, intrinsic value you carry within your own mind, your skills, your reputation, and your absolute refusal to let anyone treat you as disposable. When I walked away from that boardroom table, I did not have to actively sabotage or destroy Henry's $120 million empire. My absence alone did that for me. My quiet, calculated exit did not break their company. It simply proved an undeniable truth to the entire corporate world. I was never just an employee holding their machine together. I was the empire all along.